Fasten your seat belts. The Space Pathfinder Academy is holding a final exam, but instead of a formal ball, Varos 9 is waiting for you. Where others see a passing grade, you will find a deadly threat, and your most advanced technologies may turn against you. This is not a test, this is a hunt. And in this hell you are prey. The capsules descended with a hissing sound, landing on the damp, moss-covered soil of Varos 9. Steam escaped from the exhaust valves, dissolving into the treetops. 15 elite trainees were launched from the orbiter, each of whom was selected from a different species renowned for their survival skills. For many, this event was of great importance. The final test before graduating from the Space Academy of Pathfinders, the boundaries separating officers from privates, legends from mediocrity. But no one expected Varos 9 to be so alive. The trees stretched upward, but not in a uniform verticality like the pine trees of Guy, but in a sinuous, pulsating geometry. Eryx's cell squinted. Each trunk seemed to stretch and barely noticeably shift, their bark glistening in the light, as if covered with perspiration. The air was heavy with the smell of rot and vegetable oils, and even the ground underfoot seemed alive. Her boots made a dull sound with every step on the elastic ground. She silently exited the capsule without saying a word or activating the emergency beacon. She knew that this was not the way to do it on this test, otherwise the signal would mean failure. Overhead, bright flashes indicated other capsules descending through the foliage. Some crashed clumsily into branches, others gracefully glided down thanks to repulsor stabilizers that softened the descent. She knew that most of her fellow students had brought with them advanced bioenhancements, skin-sensitive instruments, adaptive optics, or special survival glands. She herself took only her body, her mind, and what the ancient forests of Guy had once taught her. It wasn't self-confidence, but instinct. She turned and crouched down, touching the surface under her feet. It was soft, consisting of a thick layer of decaying vegetation and strange, intertwining root systems. The microorganisms tried to analyze its chemical composition. Eryx's cell stood up, shaking the damp soil off her hands, and began to move, keeping a short distance from the neighboring area. A tall, purple-skinned intern named Zephyr was making subharmonic clicks, using echolocation to scan the surroundings. His kind, the krill, was famous for navigating the voids of dead moons with just acoustic reflection. But on Varos 9, his clicks were absorbed by the leaves, which did not reflect the sound. Frustrated, he clicked louder, but the forest remained silent. The krill trainee blinked in confusion, then froze as a large creature rustled behind him. The creature moved, aware of the sound in the distance, but did not change its pace. It had already followed the test rules. No technology, no outside help, no communication, and no escape for the next 24 standard hours. The goal was simple: survive in an unpredictable environment. The teacher deliberately blurred the meaning of build a shelter that can withstand nighttime changes in the ecosystem. She was standing in a clearing surrounded by sharp rocks and partially destroyed trees. She could tell that there were others here too, perhaps just moments ago. They probably left, looking for higher ground or flat ground. She stayed, feeling that this place was a natural barrier. The air was slightly cooler, and the strange sounds echoing through the forest seemed to subside as they approached the area. She put down her small survival kit and started looking for trees to climb. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, a blue-skinned intern named Kai from the aquatic world of Aquarius struggled to adapt to the terrestrial environment. Immediately, he tried to build a shelter by collecting wide leaves and applying secreting gels from his palms. But the leaves didn't stick. He screamed in his native language and waved away the insects. The insects disintegrated into clouds of caustic steam upon contact. His screams echoed through the forest. Another intern called out to him, but the forest swallowed up the sound. Eryx's cell stood at the base of a tree that looked healthy and sturdy enough to climb. She leaned on him, and the branches overhead seemed thick and promising. She reached for a small vine and pulled it. It was strong. Using it as a support, she pulled herself up, wrapping her legs around the trunk. Her shoes found small natural protrusions. The wood smelled of metal, as if the sap contained iron or copper, and its surface was slippery. Movement by movement, she climbed the tree. Kelia Eryx was carefully removing long strips of bark from the inner branches. These strips, softened, could be used as a rope. As she worked, she hummed softly, a habit she had developed while hiking in the Appalachian Mountains on Guy. The sound seemed to calm her down, and more importantly, it didn't disturb the forest. The hours passed, the sun barely moved, but the shadows shifted in an alarming way. Time seemed to flow differently here. Eryx's cell did not look at the sky. She trusted her own rhythm. She could hear voices, screams, uttered in panic. There have been theories about magnetic shielding and local gravity pockets. Some trainees believed that trees were alive and connected in a neural network. Others believed that the ordeal was a psychological simulation. But none of that mattered to her. All that mattered was staying above ground and not getting wet. As dusk fell, a loud, guttural sound echoed through the trees on the other side of the forest. It sounded like the roar of a giant. Another scream echoed through the forest, indicating that someone had encountered one of the local predators. Eryx's cell shuddered, but remained in its place. She had already chosen her position and intended to finish her platform before nightfall. Her mind, honed by years of hiking, building and surviving without modern technology, did not allow panic. She had already faced fear and overcome it. She would do it again. She tied the first branch using 2 strips of bark, tying and twisting them the way she had done countless times. The platform slowly and silently took shape. The trees swayed gently beneath her, and a cool breeze swept by, making her feel weightless for a moment. But she stood firm, not on the ground, but on her own confidence. Downstairs, another intern's shelter collapsed with a crash, followed by angry curses. Kelia Eryx didn't even look down. She reached for another branch, because there was still a lot to do. The lights started to go out, but not as usual. Kelia Eryx was working in the woods, gradually sinking into the evening. Suddenly, golden rays of sunlight pierced through the foliage, casting dancing patterns on the leaves and branches. In the next instant, the shadows began to engulf everything in long, jagged streaks. The crowns of the forest seemed to react to the fading light, as if a living curtain was descending across the sky. Kelia Eryx stopped her work, sitting motionless on a high branch. Her shelter hadn't been completed yet, but it was sturdy enough to support her weight and protect her from above. She arranged several large palm-like leaves on top, securing them with braided bark fibers. The structure swayed slightly, but it was solid underneath. The forest was changing not only in terms of light. The atmosphere was also changing. The temperature dropped sharply, bringing with it a damp, musty chill that clung to her skin and clothes. Kelia Eryx reached for the cloth she had hidden in her belt pouch, a square of thermal material woven from the fibers of the Guy soil. Kelia Eryx wrapped herself in an insulating material, trying not to shake it too much, so as not to upset the balance. The smell of cooking oils was no longer in the air. Instead, it smelled of metal, like wet iron mixed with a faintly sweet and nauseating odor. In the distance, a high-pitched screech broke the silence of the forest. It was not a sound that Kelia Eryx could identify as human or belonging to any species she knew. A screech came from the western sector, echoed once before abruptly fading away. The forest was silent again. Kelia Eryx leaned forward slightly, keeping her balance, her gaze fixed on the dark areas below, where the undergrowth rustled without any breeze. Something was moving there. Something heavy. She could feel it in the vibrations of the trunk beneath her. A short, stocky alien intern named Thorn stumbled into the foliage nearby. He chose a low-lying pool for shelter, believing that the soft soil would be easier to dig and build a nest. His kind, the Brontax, were instinctive diggers. Thorn spent the afternoon digging a shallow trench in the ground for warmth, but the soil proved resistant. The earth was covered with organic matter, which moved and reacted when disturbed. With thick arms covered in dark mud, Thorn tried to get out of the sucking quagmire, but his foot got tangled in a vine-like root that wrapped around his ankle, tightening with each attempt to escape. With a grunt, he fell backwards, landing on the wet ground. His cries for help were swallowed up by the unnatural acoustics of the forest. Eryx's cell was watching from above, not with malice, but with solemn awareness. If she had gone out earlier in the day, even once, to check if someone was responding nearby, the echo would have returned distorted, carrying her own voice in the opposite direction, as if mocking her. She realized that the sound couldn't be trusted here, so she remained in silence. Thorn struggled for a few more moments before finally managing to cut through the vine with his field blade. He didn't look up, unaware that he was being watched. Nearby, a slender intern named Sirius, from a species living on a planet with a light atmosphere and levitation based on pollen, was trying to create a floating shelter. She gathered large white flowers and began activating their air sacs, expecting them to lift a hammock-like structure that she wove between them. However, Varos 9's gravity did not cooperate, and instead the pouches exploded, releasing a thin glowing mist that stuck to her exoskeleton. At first she thought it was harmless, but then it started to itch and then burn. Sirius screamed, her movements becoming erratic and wild, the light from the fog creating a surreal halo around her. Kelia Eryx looked away, knowing that there was nothing she could do. The sun, or whatever its likeness is here, has gone out. Darkness descended like a closing curtain. Eryx's cell struck a small stone against another, one she found embedded in the bark of a tree, creating a few faint sparks. It was a small spark, but it had made a small nest out of dried moss and bark scrapings. After a few more strokes, the ember caught fire. She bent down, blowing carefully, lighting the fire with confident hands. A faint orange glow emerged from the nest, and she transferred it to a simple bowl made from the spiral bark she had carved earlier. The fire didn't last long, but it was enough to warm her hands and dispel the momentary chill. Kelia Eryx placed a glowing piece of bark under a reflective sheet to hide the light from predators. From the distant trees, the sounds of movement intensified. She could hear claws scraping against the bark, wet paw pads pressing into the moss, and long tails rustling through the leaves. Nothing had come close yet, but she could feel the Varos 9 creatures, attracted by their keen sense of smell, showing interest. A flickering light would attract their attention. The noise would have alarmed them, and the bravest could be attracted by warmth. She sat motionless, her heart was calm, her legs were crossed, and her breathing slowed down to barely noticeable. Another scream echoed, this time a short, suffocating sigh. A large intern named Brutus had built a shelter out of broad leaves and thorny stems earlier in the day. Now, in the darkness, those stalks began to curl, tying themselves into knots that squeezed the shelter and pierced his back. He thought the spikes were inert, but he was wrong. His scream was followed by silence, and then a long, drawn-out rustle. Kelia Eryx did not raise her head. Another intern activated his emergency beacon, and a small red light pulsed in the darkness as the tow truck descended. The drone scanned the area, extended its arms, and unhesitatingly retrieved the trainee. One less voice in the dark. Kelia Eryx continued to count in her mind. 13 left, maybe less. Suddenly, a dazzling light appeared right in front of her. She watched them for a while, mesmerized by their dancing. Then she turned her gaze back to the ground where the creature was. It's gone. The knots in the bark wrapped gently around her shelter, their presence neither painful nor aggressive. They just hung in the air, their light was warm and steady. She watched them for a few minutes. One of them landed on her hand. For the first time since the capsule landed, she smiled. She survived the initial onslaught, but the night was far from over, and she knew it would only get worse. The forest pulsed with silent menace as the night deepened into its deepest silence. The air was oppressive, like a heavy blanket. Soaked in moisture, every branch above her trembled with invisible tension, and every breeze sounded like a whisper from a mouth just out of sight. And yet, despite the darkness below and the strange glow above, she remained motionless on her perch. Her mind was methodically going over the next steps she needed to take. She still had to secure the outer perimeter of her treehouse platform, and there were still cracks in the roof that could let in dew, or worse, something else. But she had time. Her instinct told her that predators preyed on those who panicked and acted out of fear, so she waited until the cold became truly unbearable before resuming her work. The temporary thermal wrap on her shoulders absorbed most of the moisture, so she took it off, folded it, and placed it on a nearby tree. She rubbed her hands vigorously, then took out a handful of dry twigs that she had prepared earlier. They were perfectly curved to connect. Kelia Eryx squatted down, balancing carefully, connecting 2 branches into an improvised joint, then tied them with the remaining fibrous cord. She worked slowly and purposefully, her mind free of calculations or theoretical possibilities. She wasn't running simulations in her head, she was listening to the wind. The occasional snapping of distant branches, and the barely noticeable pull of her rope as she pulled on it. The difference between instinct and intelligence has never been more obvious. Most of the other trainees were trained in adaptive tactical response using predictive algorithms, survival instincts, and AI scenario planning. She was also taught by her grandfather in the remote wilderness of Oregon, where they do not guess, but observe, do not predict, but listen. Another event happened far below. A slender, tall intern with translucent skin named Orion created a structure made of pressed leaves and hardened sap in a clearing. It looked flawless, with perfect geometric proportions, but it lacked height, and now it served as a heat trap, attracting night scavengers attracted by the smell of resinous juice. Kelia Eryx heard his muffled screams, followed by a sharp squeal. The structure collapsed inside when something broke through the wall. A moment later, a figure emerged from the ruins. The distinctive drone of a tow truck echoed through the forest canopy, growing stronger and fading. She remained unperturbed, not even looking up. Her goal was not to surpass others, but to outlive the forest itself. She fixed the last corner pillar, creating a solid triangular structure. Then she took out 2 large leaves shaped like open wings and began to attach them to the top. Using the small needle-like bones that she had prepared in advance, the process was slow but thorough. Thorns pierced through the leaves, securing them securely in place. The veins in the leaves, undamaged, created a waterproof barrier when they were stitched. This barrier naturally bent along with the structure, forming a dome that drained moisture away from the edges. When she was done, she lowered herself into the center of her shelter and tested its flexibility by shifting her weight from side to side. The structure swayed slightly, but remained stable. It creaked once, then calmed down. For the first time since arriving on Varos 9, she lay on her back. Above her, small stars shone through the cracks in the canopy, although some of them twinkled and moved, clearly not being stars at all. She knew that some forest creatures had evolved to mimic the heavenly patterns to attract prey. Even the sky couldn't be trusted here. She reached into the cavity next to her and took out the round fruit she had picked earlier. It looked like an avocado but with a spiral skin. She noticed that small rodents consumed this fruit without any side effects, which prompted her to try it herself. She peeled off the outer layer and enjoyed the fruit. She carefully unwrapped the spiral, revealing the soft green interior. It had a slight smell of cucumber and iron. She took a small bite. It was tasteless and a little gritty, but nutritious. She chewed slowly, trying to conserve her energy as much as her calories. Her body needed something warm, but she wasn't risking making a full-fledged fire yet. As she ate, she reflected on the shift in her thinking that had brought her to this moment. Kelia Eryx recalled her initial orientation at the academy, where alien trainees arrived with pride and ceremonial armor. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with contempt. No one expected that a human girl from the traffic police would be able to compete with minds bred for adaptability or bodies designed for resilience. But she did not come from the sterile cities of the traffic police. Most galactic officials knew that she had grown up off-world, climbing trees higher than towers, setting raccoon traps, and repairing broken solar panels with duct tape and perseverance. Her training didn't come from the labs. The sound of scratching knees and checking the weather came to her. Another sound reached her ears, closer this time. She sat up slowly, every joint quiet, her eyes scanning the lower branches. The shadow moved steadily and slowly across the forest floor. The creature was tall, with limbs that bent too many times, a narrow head that moved soundlessly, and legs that left no footprints. It passed by her tree, stopped, and raised its head. His eyes, 6 of them, glowed with a soft amber light. Kelia Eryx froze, not breathing. The creature waited. Then it turned and moved on, disinterested. She sank back down, letting the tension slowly drain from her shoulders. It sensed others, but it wasn't hungry, or perhaps she hid her presence well enough. In any case, she wasn't going to make assumptions. She wrapped her cloak of leaves more tightly around herself and threw back her head. A sudden burst of frustration echoed through the night from a nearby area. It was trainee Xerxes, a slender creature with 4 arms and glowing orange eyes. Xerxes, a member of a species with 4 limbs and eyes flickering like flames, spent hours building a floating shelter. By manipulating the magnetic fields of local minerals, he created a floating platform using only his thoughts and the code he wrote on the bark with his species-specific finger chalk. However, something disrupted the stability of the shelter, causing it to spin wildly before it collapsed in a burst of energy. Xerxes let out a cry of frustration, and then there was silence. Another drone, another extraction. Kelia Eryx closed her eyes. She didn't celebrate her triumph, because every setback reminded her that the forest doesn't care about intelligence or imagination. He recognized only those who listened, adapted, and respected him. She turned on her side, wrapping herself more tightly in her cloth and leaves. The shelter completely covered her on 3 sides, with a small hole at her knees for air circulation. Her elevated position provided her with protection from land-based hazards. Her scent was hidden, her fire was extinguished, and her tools were gone. Being in a safe shelter, she stayed there, not just alive, but unharmed. She allowed her thoughts to wander not in a dream, but in contemplation. She remembered her mother's voice, reading old adventure stories by candlelight. She remembered her grandfather's words, Your mind will save you, but only if your body knows when to wait. Those words had been echoing in her mind all day, and now, in the dark depths of the alien forest, they had become her shield. The forest groaned again, but this time, Eryx's cell remained unperturbed. The first real scream came after the second burst of darkness. Kelia Eryx discovered that the nights on Varos 9 were not separate events, but an oscillating cycle of shadows and pressure that swept through the canopy like waves. Each wave brought a new layer of cold, a new heaviness in the air, and a change in the sounds from the forest floor. The second wave hit with more force than the first, and Kelia Eryx's body reacted. Instinctively, her posture stiffened, her breathing became shallow, and her heartbeat slowed to match the stillness around her. Suddenly, a shrill scream echoed from the north, filled with a sense of urgency. It wasn't a rhythmic scream, but rather a high-pitched wail that pierced through the night like a tearing sound. Eryx's cell sat up, her shelter was intact, but the sound reverberated in the bark beneath her. She kept her breathing steady and listened. The scream lasted for 3 long seconds. Then she stopped and recognized the rhythm. It was a male in turn, probably Thunder, a muscular intern from Drax's volcanic world. He was noisy and mocking during the pre-exam simulations, making fun of her lack of equipment. Now he was either evacuated or being taken apart. A moment later, a bright white light flashed among the trees as a tow truck drone descended. She remained motionless, but the drone briefly hovered in the area and emitted a network of scanning pulses. Then he stood up, carrying something in his arms. Whether it was a body or a spirit, she couldn't tell. Thunder was eliminated from the exam. Another voice fell silent for Kelia Eryx. She shifted slightly and checked the tension of the tree bark ropes around the edges of her shelter. Everything was secure, but a slight movement caused a reaction from below. A low growl came from something crouching at the base of her tree. It didn't walk around like the previous predator, but it was still a threat. She waited, not looking down. She closed her eyes and exhaled through her nose. An hour passed, and her muscles ached, and her legs began to shake from being stuck in an uncomfortable position. The growling had stopped, but she knew better than to think the creature was gone. It could have been waiting, or for the natural weakness of exhaustion to take hold of her. So she slowly turned around, resting her legs but keeping the rest of her body alert. The night turned against everyone who was still in the forest. She could feel it. Varos 9 didn't just accept them, he observed them. To the southeast, a sudden flash of light burst into the trees, green and shimmering. Someone lit a chemical torch. She blinked, then regretted even that move. The light attracted creatures. The torchbearer was trainee Oleran from the vibrant world of Ismar. His people thrived in ecosystems rich in light and used bioluminescent flashes to communicate. But this was not his world. The glow illuminated the trees, the area around him, and for a brief moment she watched as his figure darted between the trees, the torch swinging wildly. Then something fast and huge appeared out of the shadows. Too fast to be seen clearly, the torch fell and the light went out. This time there was no scream, just a thud and silence. The drone hadn't arrived, and she was breathing in dry air, and there was a taste of iron in her mouth. Her hands were cold, even inside the shelter. The tension spread from my muscles to my thoughts. She forced herself to breathe more slowly. Fear was not an option. She didn't need adrenaline, she needed clarity. From above, the branches moved not because of the wind, but because of the weight. Something was climbing, not next to her tree, but not far away. The rustling was purposeful, the pauses rhythmic. She turned her head without moving her body, and caught the source in the far corner of her vision, and in turn climbing, not climbing a tree with his bare hands. She recognized his silhouette. It was Akan, a young man with wide eyes and a green complexion. The recruit, who hails from a higher gravity world, underestimated the dangers of the forest. Now trying to imitate the courage of his late mentor, he had no shelter, no plan to rise above the ground, only despair. He reached a high branch, pulled himself up, and began to cry softly, unaware of how the sound was spreading in the upper tier of the forest. Kelia Eryx watched as 2 small glowing figures circled around the trunk below him. They moved like cats, but their tails were stiff and their eyes were colorless. He didn't see them, but they saw him. She turned away, unable to bear what would happen next. Then there was a chain reaction. One scream led to another. From the west, someone called for help in a broken dialect. From the south, the shelter was engulfed in flames caused by a faulty thermal crystal. The recruit burst into flames and rolled into the undergrowth, setting everything on fire. The viral environment reacted by spraying the fire with a thick layer of blue pollen, extinguishing the flames but leaving a sticky residue. The trainee's fate was sealed. Soon the body was dragged into the vines. No escape, no flash, disappeared without a trace. She knew that the number was decreasing rapidly. She counted again. I was 15 in the beginning. Maybe 8 left. Maybe less. She forced herself to concentrate. She took out a small bag from under a layer of leaves. It was a small bag that she had woven earlier from overlapping strips of bark. Inside, she hid 3 polished stones with a metal coating. They reflected just enough moonlight to serve as warning flashes. But only at close range. She arranged them in a triangular formation next to her elbow. If something approached her platform, she could knock them against each other, creating a vibration. Sharp, sudden, and loud. It wouldn't help her escape, but it could distract her. It's a trick. Last option for the rest of the night. Moving forward like a wounded monster, every breath was a conscious choice. Every sound carried a potential danger. No one else was talking. The forest was silent, including even the bravest. A few hours before dawn, the growling returned to her tree. It was closer this time. She clutched the side of her shelter and slowly bent over, shifting her weight through a gap in the foliage. She could see him clearly, a massive creature with dark skin and shiny patches of muscle that shimmered in the moonlight. Its nostrils flared as it moved on 6 legs. The mouth was not visible, and the split ridge with a fin trembled with every step. It wasn't hunting, it was searching. She held her breath as it moved away, hitting a nearby tree. The tree groaned under the weight, a low rumble echoing in the earth, in the bark and in its bones. Then the creature disappeared. She exhaled, eyes wide, fingers still clenched. She had experienced the worst that night, but the sun had not yet risen, and she did not trust Varos 9 to allow dawn without a new trial. The sky didn't lighten gradually, it shattered. A narrow, ash-gray crevice appeared between the trees, not like dawn, but as if an ancient and heavy presence had finally lifted its hand from the crown. The stars went out one by one, some faded naturally, others went out like artificial lights being turned off. The humidity remained, but the atmosphere had changed from the tense silence of hours of hunting to something open and waiting. Kelia Eryx opened her eyes not because she heard something, but because the pressure in her chest finally let go. She sat up slowly, pushing aside the layers of leaves covering her shelter and blinking at the light. At first, her joints resisted movement. The hours of immobility had frozen her muscles, and the cold had stuck like a parasite. She stretched her neck and stretched her shoulders, clasping her hands tightly, making the joints crack. The platform withstood the storm, despite the fact that the main materials remained intact. The worst was over. She examined the ropes and found that none had broken. Not a single branch bent. Simple materials, chosen not for their novelty but for their reliability, have weathered the storm. She walked to the edge and peered through the leaves. The forest floor turned into a changing picture of ashy moss, broken branches, and dark spots. There was no such thing yesterday. Her tree remained untouched, but not everyone was so lucky. To her right, a few meters away, the shelter collapsed into a pile of charred fibers and burnt vines. A 4-meter claw scratch was dug into the ground, but there were no signs of a body or movement. Only the remnants of panic, half hidden in the morning mist. A faint mechanical sound broke the silence, a low, steady hum. She looked up. Tow truck drones flew over the trees, gliding through the clouds. They changed their formation. Instead of arriving individually in response to emergency signals, they now flew in wide circles, scanning and collecting data in the area. The exam was completed, and she remained in place, motionless, when the first drone descended. He did not approach her. Instead, he hovered over a nearby area, extending his manipulators and lowering the net to collect what looked like a pile of torn cloth. Then, without any ceremony, he pulled in the net. Another setback. The drone turned and rose. The second drone flew directly over her position, hovered for a moment, and then continued on its way. She started counting the number of drones that had arrived and the number of those that had flown away with their cargo. She saw 2 more drones retrieve the unharmed trainees, one of whom was limping and barely conscious, while the other was wrapped in emergency stasis gel. She recognized the second trainee as Aru. Her exoskeleton was now dull and cracked. Kelia Eryx watched her rise with a sense of silent respect. She survived, albeit with difficulty. A new drone descended and hovered next to her. This one was different, elegant and black, and had a unique identifier. The emblem of the Space Academy of Pathfinders, a diagnostic drone, did not carry medical equipment. Instead, he emitted a narrow beam of light, which he directed upward, scanning the outside of her shelter. She sat motionless, back straight, chin up as the drone rotated, examining the base of her platform, joints, and roof structure. He hovered in place for a few moments, as if processing something unexpected. The beam shifted and projected a pale blue circle next to her feet. A small screen appeared in the air, on which one word was displayed in 4 languages: test. She exhaled and nodded once. The drone retreated, disappearing into the gray morning air. She stood up, straightening to her full height for the first time. Her legs trembled slightly, and the platform creaked beneath her, but she kept her balance. With one last look at the shelter, at the knots she had tied, at the shape she had carved in her memory, not with her hands, she left. The central cord, which had been tied and secured, was now lying loosely, and the leaves were gently folded inwards like a folded blanket. She gathered up her bark pouch, 3 polished stones, and her thermal cloth and began to descend. The descent was slower than the ascent, and each movement required patience, as she double-checked each support before grabbing it with her hands. She took her time, and when her boots touched the forest floor, they sank slightly into the moss, but the weight under her feet felt well-deserved, and the forest no longer pressed down on her with hostility. He remained wary, but no longer angry. As she walked forward, there was a path to the evacuation site, not a path in the usual sense, but a corridor where drones were now hanging, and trainees were coming out one by one, limping, beaten, but alive. She walked past an intern, a man with dull gray skin and empty eyes, who ignored her, which she did not expect. The female instructor added, "She was silent throughout the entire cycle." The male instructor said, "She was silent throughout the entire cycle." She didn't ask about her bill, she was indifferent. She passed, and that was all that mattered. As she boarded the waiting shuttle, she caught a glimpse of her reflection. Her face was haggard from stress and hunger, her clothes were damp and tattered, and her eyes were sunken but unbending. She didn't look at all like the trainees who arrived in immaculate uniforms and polished gear. She looked real. She took her seat and buckled herself in, remaining silent as the other trainees entered the cabin. Those who survived gathered in silence, without celebrations or conversations. There was just the quiet presence of those who had seen the worst and gone through it. When the shuttle lifted off from Varos 9, the forest disappeared under the clouds. Kelia Eryx closed her eyes not to rest, but to remember. Because someday, in a more brutal war or a deeper abyss, what she learned here will be more important than any medal or title. And she won't forget.